They're coming back! Grandpa Frank's voice cracked as headlights swept across our ranch. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking as three black SUVs with fake HOA enforcement decals roared toward us. These weren't real cops, just hired thugs who'd been ramming our fence every single day for 2 weeks straight. The wooden barrier that had protected our home for 50 years was about to be destroyed again. But tonight felt different. Something in Grandpa's eyes told me he was done running scared. Comment where you're watching from, because what happens next will shock you. 15 days ago, my world turned into a living nightmare. Day one started at 6 in the morning with the sound of car horns blaring like air raid sirens. I watched from my bedroom window as a black SUV pulled up to our gate, its fake HOA enforcement decal gleaming under the early sun. The man who stepped out wore a navy uniform that looked like it came from a costume shop, complete with a plastic badge that caught the light wrong. "Property inspection for HOA violations," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. Grandpa Frank emerged from the house, coffee mug in hand, his 72-year-old frame still strong from decades of engineering work. The confusion on his weathered face was heartbreaking to watch. "Son, we don't have an HOA out here," Grandpa said, gesturing toward the open ranch land that stretched for miles around us. "This is unincorporated county land, has been for 50 years. But they kept coming. Same time, same fake authority. By day 3, a citation for tall grass. By day 7, midnight pounding to inspect our fence. And by day 10, invoices sailed over the rails, each demanding $1,500 for imaginary infractions. I started recording everything on my phone, creating a digital folder labeled Evidence that grew heavier each day. 15 videos of harassment, each one showcasing a new method of intimidation. The pattern was crystal clear to anyone who bothered to look. They were escalating, testing our boundaries, seeing how much fear they could instill before we broke completely. Day 14 brought the final warning, a document printed on official-looking letterhead that threatened severe consequences for continued non-compliance. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, but the grammar mistakes gave away its amateur construction. Still, the threat felt real enough to make my stomach clench with anxiety. Then came day 15. 8 o'clock in the evening found our family gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories about my school science fair project on Newton's laws of motion. The normalcy felt precious, like something we were stealing from a world determined to terrorize us. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the oak trees that had watched over our property since before I was born. The diesel engines announced themselves like mechanical thunder rolling across our land. No honking this time, no shouted demands. Just the grinding sound of heavy vehicles moving with deadly purpose across our gravel driveway. Duke, our golden retriever, started barking with an urgency I'd never heard before, his instincts recognizing danger before our human minds could process what was happening. I ran to the window and felt my blood turn to ice water. "Grandpa, they're backing up." Frank dropped his fork and started to rise, but physics had already taken control of the situation. The first SUV reversed with mechanical precision, its backup lights casting everything in hellish red. The driver had done this before. The angle was too perfect, the timing too calculated for this to be spontaneous rage. The impact hit like a backyard detonation. 50 years of family history blew into splinters, lethal chunks and sawdust riding the air like a wooden snowstorm. Grandpa pulled me away from the window just as a railroad tie-sized chunk of fence came crashing through where I'd been standing. The debris struck his left shoulder with a sickening thud, and I watched his white shirt bloom red with blood. His grunt of pain was lost in the chaos of splintering wood and revving engines. 6 stepped out in matching Navy HOA enforcement costumes. Their leader hid behind designer shades in the dark, a slick smile sliding across his face. "Next time, pay your fees on schedule," he called out, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain on others. The woman who stepped out of the third SUV commanded attention like a force of nature. Her blonde hair was styled into helmet-like perfection, and her pink business suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. The Louis Vuitton clutch in her manicured hands screamed wealth, though something about its logo seemed slightly off in the dim light. "I am Karen Hayes, president of the Meadowbrook HOA," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "This area now falls under my jurisdiction." Grandpa pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder, his engineering mind already calculating the precision of the attack. "Meadowbrook is 10 miles from here, ma'am. You have no authority over our property. I'm expanding my territory, she replied, the word dripping with the kind of entitlement that made my skin crawl. This is the Greater Meadowbrook Initiative. You owe $2,000 for non-compliance. She threw an invoice at Grandpa's feet like she was feeding scraps to a dog. The paper landed in a puddle of his blood, the red spreading across the fake letterhead like evidence of a crime scene. Frank immediately pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice steady despite the pain radiating from his shoulder. Someone just destroyed my property and injured me. I need police assistance. The dispatcher's response felt like a second blow. Is this a medical emergency requiring immediate attention? My shoulder is bleeding, but the real issue is the property damage and assault. For property damage, you'll need to file a report at the station tomorrow morning. This sounds like a civil matter. Karen's laughter cut through the night air like broken glass. See, even the police know I have authority here. She pulled out her phone and started photographing the destroyed fence, each flash illuminating the destruction like lightning strikes. For the violation file, our neighbor Bill Thompson came running when he heard the crash, his contractor's boots crunching through the debris field. Frank, Jesus, your shoulder. Bill examined the damage with professional eyes that had seen decades of construction and demolition. This impact angle, it's precise, like demolition work. They've done this before. Meadowbrook HOA? Bill shook his head in disbelief. That's a rich subdivision 10 miles away. We're rural county land, no HOA jurisdiction here. I found the invoice they'd thrown down, its letterhead bold and threatening. Greater Meadowbrook HOA Expansion Zone, compliance required. The paper felt real enough, but something about the formatting seemed wrong, like a student's attempt at forging official documents. Expansion? HOAs can't just expand like that. Bill studied the document more carefully. Frank, this is fraud, pure and simple. Grandpa analyzed the tire tracks, the impact angles, the scattered debris pattern. Everything was too calculated to be random violence. Bill, they'll be back, and next time will be worse. I hugged Duke, who was still trembling from the chaos, his golden fur damp with nervous sweat. Why won't the police help us, Grandpa? Frank looked at me with eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty, but his voice carried a determination that made me feel safer. Because sometimes, kiddo, we have to protect ourselves, legally. The question hung in the air like smoke from the destruction. What exactly was Karen Hayes running, and how far would Frank go to stop her? The next morning found Grandpa, Frank, and Bill driving to the county records office, Frank's shoulder wrapped in bandages that pulled tight every time he shifted the steering wheel. The official building smelled like old paper and bureaucratic indifference, but we needed answers about this Greater Meadowbrook HOA expansion that Karen Hayes claimed gave her authority over our lives. What we discovered made my blood run cold. Karen Hayes was indeed a real HOA president, but only of Meadowbrook Estates, a 50-home luxury development exactly 10 miles away from our ranch. No expansion had ever been filed with the county. No legal documents existed granting expanded jurisdiction. No board meetings had authorized territorial growth beyond their original boundaries. So what exactly is she doing? Bill muttered, scanning through deed records and incorporation papers that painted a picture of legitimate authority being twisted into something sinister. Frank's engineering mind started connecting dots that formed a pattern more terrifying than random harassment. Through online searches and careful questioning around the community, a criminal enterprise began to emerge from the shadows. Karen wasn't just running fake enforcement. She was operating an organized extortion racket that used HOA authority as camouflage for systematic theft. Her operation employed 3 separate enforcement teams, each consisting of 5 to 6 hired muscle recruited through classified ads that promised easy money for community compliance work. The uniforms came from Amazon, the badges from online printing services, and the authority from nowhere except Karen's sociopathic imagination. But the victims were heartbreakingly real. She targeted elderly residents living alone, widows and widowers who'd already lost their strongest advocates and support systems. The harassment followed a precise 15 to 20-day cycle, starting with fake citations and escalating to property destruction designed to break their spirits and empty their bank accounts. Monthly fees ranged from $200 to $500, extracted through pure terror from people too afraid to fight back. When victims refused to pay or questioned her authority, the harassment intensified until they either capitulated completely or sold their homes at drastically reduced prices just to escape the nightmare. Karen's company, Hayes Property LLC, somehow always appeared as a motivated buyer, purchasing properties for 40 to 60% below market value before flipping them for massive profits within 6 months. I spent hours at my laptop, creating spreadsheets with the Excel skills I'd learned in advanced math class. The numbers told a story that made me sick to my stomach. 12 properties had been targeted by her enforcement teams over the past 2 years. Every single victim was between 68 and 84 years old. Every forced sale had occurred below market value, creating a paper trail of financial abuse that should have triggered investigations years ago. "Grandpa, how much money has she stolen?" Frank calculated the numbers with the precision of someone who'd spent decades building bridges and highways. Conservative estimate? 500,000 from forced property sales. Another 180,000 annually from fake HOA fees. She's running a $1 million operation based on terrorizing senior citizens. Her method was brutal. Pick isolated elders, grind them with weeks of pressure, smash a fence or gate, then force a choice, keep paying or sell and run. "But why don't the police stop her?" I asked, my 10-year-old sense of justice struggling to understand how such obvious crimes could continue unchecked. Bill explained the horrible genius of her system. "She's smart, Emma. Every incident gets labeled as a civil dispute. Her paperwork looks legitimate to casual inspection, and her victims are usually too elderly or frightened to pursue expensive legal action against someone who appears to have official authority." Frank studied the harassment videos I'd compiled, noting how every interaction followed the same script, employed the same vehicles, occurred at identical times. "They'll return, Bill. This time will be worse than fence ramming." But Frank Reynolds wasn't an ordinary grandfather. 35 years designing transportation infrastructure for the Department of Transportation had given him specialized knowledge that most people never acquired. His expertise included designing anti-ram barriers for highways, creating security obstacles for military installations after the Oklahoma City bombing, and understanding exactly how moving vehicles interacted with stationary objects. He opened his ancient laptop and launched AutoCAD software that still received regular updates. If legal protection won't defend us, physics will. "What are you planning?" Bill asked, leaning over Frank's shoulder as engineering diagrams began appearing on the screen. "A new fence, but not just any fence." Frank's fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising speed for someone his age. "This fence will teach them about Newton's third law." I moved closer to watch the technical drawings take shape. "What law, Grandpa?" "Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If they hit us with 3 tons of force, they'll receive exactly 3 tons back." The design emerging on his screen looked like something from a military manual. Railroad rails would provide the primary structure, heavy, durable, and designed to handle massive impacts. The rails would be angled 15 degrees outward to redirect incoming force back toward its source. Flexible mounting systems with spring dampeners would absorb initial contact before redirecting energy. Warning signs would make the danger legally clear to any approaching vehicles. Most importantly, Frank emphasized, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making life-or-death engineering decisions, everything must be completely legal. Castle Doctrine allows property defense. Warning signs establish clear notification. We're not attacking anyone, we're simply allowing physics to operate according to natural law. The blueprint showed a defensive structure that could withstand massive impact while redirecting that same energy back toward whatever had struck it. Frank had designed similar barriers for protecting government buildings from vehicle attacks, but never for defending a ranch house against fake HOA enforcement. "The beautiful thing about physics," he continued, pointing to force calculation diagrams on his screen, "is that it doesn't care about authority, intimidation, or fake badges. It only responds to mass, velocity, and angle of impact." Bill studied the plans with growing admiration. "Frank, this is brilliant. But can we actually build something like this?" "With the right materials and enough help, absolutely. Railroad salvage yards have tons of steel rails from discontinued tracks. Concrete companies dispose of excess materials regularly, and I know contractors who've been looking for a legitimate reason to fight back against these scammers." I watched Grandpa's transformation from victim to engineer, seeing how his decades of expertise were finally finding purpose in protecting our family. The fence design wasn't just about stopping vehicles, it was about demonstrating that actions have consequences, that bullies eventually encounter immovable objects, and that sometimes the best defense involves letting physics teach lessons that words cannot convey. "When they come back," Frank said, saving his plans with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a complex engineering problem, they'll discover that some boundaries cannot be crossed without paying a very steep price. The question that kept me awake that night was simple but terrifying. How many other families was Karen Hayes terrorizing, and would our community find the courage to help us build something that could stop her permanently? I made a decision that would change everything. Taking the 15 videos of harassment and footage from the fence ramming, I edited them into a compilation that told our story with devastating clarity. The title felt urgent under my fingertips. Fake HOA Scam Terrorizing Elderly. Please share. Within 24 hours of uploading to our community social media page, 15,000 people had watched our nightmare unfold. 48 hours brought 40,000 views and 800 shares that spread across neighboring counties like wildfire. But the comments section became something I never expected, a gathering place for other victims who'd suffered in silence. "Oh my God, they did the exact same thing to my mother 6 months ago," wrote someone named Sarah. "I thought she was losing her mind when she talked about fake HOA people demanding money." "I've been paying $300 a month to these scammers for over a year," confessed another commenter. "I was too embarrassed to tell my children I was being extorted. My grandmother sold her house because of these people. Now I know it was all fake." The anger in that message radiated through the screen. I created a private group called Victims of Fake HOA Scam, Hayes, and watched our membership explode. 72 hours after launching, 147 people had joined, each carrying stories that made my heart break. Martha, 78 years old, had been paying $400 monthly for an entire year because she was too terrified to resist. George, 82, endured 3 separate gate rammings before selling his family home at a devastating loss. Dorothy, 74, moved into a nursing home because the stress was literally killing her. Harold, 80, was still making monthly payments even after seeing our videos because Karen's threats had convinced him that stopping would bring worse consequences. The group's collective damage estimate exceeded $300,000 in fraudulent fees, plus 8 homes sold below market value under duress. Every single victim followed the same heartbreaking pattern: elderly, isolated, systematically terrorized until they either paid or fled. Then came the comment that changed our trajectory completely. "My sister is County Commissioner Helen Wilson. I'm sending this to her right now." Helen called Frank directly the next morning, her voice shaking with a mixture of professional outrage and personal pain. "Mr. Reynolds, I just watched your granddaughter's video. My mother was also a victim." She was paying them $400 every month for 6 months. She was too ashamed to tell the family. I only discovered it when I saw Emma's footage. Helen's voice cracked with the weight of missed opportunities to protect someone she loved. "I'm launching an official investigation immediately." While we were building community support, Karen Hayes was busy defending her criminal empire on social media. Her posts on the official Meadowbrook HOA page grew increasingly unhinged as public pressure mounted. Karen flooded the HOA page with a flurry of all-caps posts claiming a legitimate expansion, threatening enhanced enforcement, and insisting she had full authority. I screenshotted everything. The investigation that Helen launched moved with surprising speed once official attention focused on Karen's operation. Local contractors began reaching out to offer support that went beyond mere sympathy. "Frank, I've got 20 steel beams left over from a canceled project, yours if you need them. My crew has 5 yards of concrete that we can't return. Happy to donate it. We're between jobs this week. My whole team wants to help build whatever you're planning." Bill took command of coordination and documentation. This is lawful community defense, every step recorded, every action by the book. We weren't just protecting one ranch, we were setting a precedent. If Karen rammed Frank's fence after he'd installed steel reinforcement and clear warnings, she'd be committing criminal assault with a deadly weapon, impossible to dismiss as a civil matter. Karen's informants reported our construction preparations, triggering increasingly frantic social media posts. "Some people never learn," she wrote, her digital breakdown visible to anyone who bothered to look. "Phase 2 is coming. My authority must be respected." I captured screenshots of every threat, adding them to our evidence file. Phase 2 sounded ominous enough to make Duke start barking toward the main road more frequently than usual. Frank noticed the surveillance. "They're watching, planning something bigger than fence ramming." "Are you scared, Grandpa?" Frank looked at me with eyes that had seen decades of challenges and solved them through careful engineering and stubborn determination. "No, sweetheart. I've been preparing for this my entire career. Sometimes bullies need to learn lessons from physics." The community support gave him something beyond materials and labor. It provided moral authority for what we were about to build. This wasn't one man's revenge fantasy. This was a neighborhood standing together against organized crime that had terrorized their most vulnerable members for too long. Helen Wilson's investigation uncovered the scope of Karen's operation that stretched beyond our county. Similar fake enforcement teams were operating in 3 neighboring areas, all following identical patterns, all connected to Karen's central command structure. The victims numbered in the hundreds, the financial damage reached into millions, and the psychological trauma was immeasurable. "She's not just a local scammer," Helen explained during our strategy meeting. "This is organized crime using HOA authority as cover for systematic extortion." As construction materials arrived and volunteers organized work schedules, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a line from which there would be no return. Karen Hayes had built her criminal empire on the assumption that elderly victims would never fight back, that communities would never unite, and that authority, even fake authority, would always triumph over individual resistance. She was about to discover how wrong someone could be about the laws of physics and human nature. Days of eerie silence, no dawn horns, no citations, no midnight pounding, stretched the tension until the whole community held its breath. Neighbors reported disturbing activities that painted a picture of escalating preparation. 3 black SUVs were spotted circling our area daily, their occupants photographing houses belonging to Frank's supporters. Karen was seen at the downtown coffee shop recruiting new enforcement officers, overheard promising $1,000 for a big job coming soon. The previous fake cops had apparently quit after witnessing the precision of our fence documentation and realizing they were participating in something far more serious than they'd bargained for. Frank continued working on our temporary fence while designing the permanent solution, but I could see the strain in his movements. Every shift of his bandaged shoulder sent pain shooting across his weathered features. Duke seemed to sense the approaching storm, refusing to sleep through the night and growling toward the road at sounds only his canine ears could detect. "Grandpa, when will they come back?" Frank studied his calendar with the methodical approach of someone who'd spent decades managing construction timelines. "Karen follows patterns, kiddo. 15 days of harassment, then escalation. Now we're in the cooling period. She'll strike when we least expect it." It had been just over a week since the first ramming. Frank estimated we had several more days of preparation time. He was catastrophically wrong. 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon found me sitting near our temporary fence completing geometry homework while Duke dozed in the warm autumn sunshine. Frank stood 50 feet away, carrying lumber to repair sections that remained damaged from the initial attack. The normalcy felt precious, like borrowed time stolen from an inevitable confrontation. The ground trembled first, a low shiver that ran through the fence posts and into my knees. Then the diesel rumble gathered itself from the road like a storm pulling tight. Not one engine, not 2, 3 vehicles bore down with a cold, deliberate rhythm. Frank looked up from his work to see 3 black SUVs accelerating down our private road with no horns, no shouted warnings, no pretense of legal authority. This was pure violence delivered with calculated efficiency. The vehicles were aimed directly at the fence section where I sat working, their trajectory making their intentions horrifyingly clear. Mathematical calculation replaced panic in Frank's engineering mind. Emma in danger zone. Vehicles approaching at high speed, 3 seconds until impact. All factors known. Solution required immediate implementation. "Emma, move, now!" Frank dropped his lumber and ran faster than his 72-year-old body should have allowed. I froze in shock, my homework scattered by wind from the approaching vehicles. Duke barked with primal urgency that cut through my paralysis. 2 seconds. Frank launched himself toward me with momentum that carried us both away from the impact zone. His injured shoulder struck the fence post with a crack that I felt in my bones. Pain exploded across his features, but his arms maintained their protective grip around my body. Crash, crash, crash. 3 SUVs struck our temporary fence in rapid succession, obliterating wood and metal with industrial efficiency. The sound was like controlled demolitions I'd seen on construction shows, except this destruction was aimed at terrorizing my family. Debris exploded in every direction, some pieces large enough to have killed me if Frank hadn't intervened. The first vehicle reversed immediately, preparing for another ramming run. But the second SUV stopped completely. Its door opened with mechanical precision, and Karen Hayes emerged like a queen surveying conquered territory. Her look was curated for power, razor-sharp suit, oversized shades, every detail chosen to broadcast control. 2 new fake cops followed her from the vehicle, larger, more intimidating than her previous employees. She stepped out, voice syrupy and sharp all at once. Tragic, really. Non-compliance has consequences. Her heels clicked through the debris. One landed on the piece of wood where Frank had carved his initials decades ago. Next time, Karen lowered her voice to a whisper that carried more threat than any scream. It might not just be a shoulder. It might be something that can't be fixed. For enforcement records, evidence of obstruction of official HOA business. Bill's truck slid to a stop at the gate. He took one look, jaw set, and moved straight to triage and scene control. "I have every authority!" Karen's scream revealed the madness lurking beneath her corporate facade. "Greater Meadowbrook is mine. Pay $5,000 within 48 hours or next time there will be no mercy." She turned toward me with a smile that belonged in nightmares. "Sweet little girl, maybe you can convince Grandpa not to make things difficult for the HOA president." Despite my terror, something inside me refused to break. You're a bad person." Karen's laughter cut through the afternoon air like breaking glass. "In business, honey, there are no good people or bad people, only winners and losers. Guess which category you belong to." The 3 SUVs roared away, leaving clouds of dust and the ruins of everything that had made our property feel safe. But something had changed in that moment of destruction. Karen had crossed a line from property damage to targeting a child, and the entire community would learn about it within hours. The hospital confirmed what Frank already knew: fractured collarbone, torn shoulder muscles, 6 to 8 weeks of recovery with strict limitations on lifting or construction work. "Doctor, in 6 weeks, I might not have a home to recover in," Frank said with the blunt honesty of someone who'd calculated exactly what Karen's escalation meant. I posted a new video to our victim support group while Frank was still in the emergency room. "She targeted me. My grandfather got hurt saving me. Watch this and tell me how we stop her." The community response exploded with righteous fury that transcended normal social media outrage. "Enough. Targeting children crosses every line," wrote one member. "My nephew is a state police officer. Sending him this video immediately," added another. "Class action lawsuit starts now," demanded a third. Helen Wilson responded within 5 minutes of my post. "Emergency community meeting tonight, 7 p.m. at the community center. Bring everyone who's been affected. This ends now." Bill sat beside Frank's hospital bed, his contractor's hands clenched into fists that spoke of controlled rage. "Frank, the entire county is talking about what happened. People want to help. Real help, not just sympathy." Frank looked at me, still shaking from our encounter with organized evil, his bandaged shoulder throbbing with every heartbeat. But his eyes held the determination of someone who'd spent decades solving problems that others considered impossible. "Then we build, Bill. We build something that will teach Karen Hayes and her crew a lesson they'll never forget. But your shoulder, I have my brain, I have my experience. And now," he gestured toward the window where neighbors were already gathering to offer support, "I have an army. Time to demonstrate what physics can accomplish." The question that would determine our future was simple but critical. With Frank seriously injured, could he lead the construction of something capable of stopping Karen's final assault? And what exactly was she planning for the enhanced enforcement she'd promised our community? Before dawn, the house felt hollow except for Grandpa's measured breaths and the soft beep of his hospital monitor still echoing in my head. I spent the night cleaning blood from the front entry and writing down everything we'd need to feel safe again. By 7 in the morning, our ranch shifted from recovery to resolve. More than 50 people arrived in coordinated teams, not for spectacle, but to stand between our family and the next attack. Licensed contractors, retired engineers, and off-duty deputies formed tight crews, while Helen's legal team documented each step to keep the build airtight. Dozens of skilled neighbors, trades, heavy equipment, and fabrication focused on one goal: build a shield that would make consequences unavoidable. Bill Thompson took charge of coordination with military precision. "Listen up, everyone. We're doing this by the book, documented, permitted, and safe. Frank will provide technical direction from his wheelchair." Helen Wilson addressed the crowd with the authority of someone who'd spent years in local government. "Karen Hayes has terrorized my mother, your families, and now she's targeted a child. This is where we draw the line, legally, properly, but firmly." Work assignments are distributed like pieces of a complex engineering puzzle. The legal team would verify all building codes and permit requirements. The engineering team would review Frank's technical specifications for structural integrity and safety compliance. Construction crews would execute the build with professional standards. The documentation team would film and photograph every step for potential legal proceedings. Frank operated from a wheelchair that the hospital insisted was mandatory for his shoulder recovery. His laptop was connected to a large TV screen that Bill had brought from his own house. The AutoCAD drawings appeared in high definition, showing details that made several contractors whistle with professional appreciation. "This isn't a weapon," Frank explained to the assembled volunteers, his voice carrying the authority of someone who designed infrastructure for the federal government. "It's a shield that teaches physics lessons." Donations poured in: rail steel, concrete, springs, hardware, and signage, enough to turn a plan into a fortress. Frank's technical explanation captivated everyone present. The rails would be positioned at a 15-degree angle leaning outward, a precisely calculated slope that would redirect incoming force back toward its source. The overlapping pattern eliminated weak points where impact could find purchase. Flexible mounting systems with industrial springs would absorb initial contact before reversing the energy. The return force would equal the input force but travel in the opposite direction. "Think of it like an automotive airbag," Frank continued, pointing to force vector diagrams that looked like something from an aerospace manual. But instead of absorbing impact, it redirects that energy. Someone who bumps gently gets pushed gently. Someone who rams with maximum force gets launched backward, I asked, my 10-year-old imagination immediately grasping the physics involved. Exactly. Physics doesn't lie, doesn't play favorites, doesn't negotiate with fake authority. Construction began with military efficiency that spoke to the professionalism of our volunteer army. Team 1 excavated holes for support posts, digging 6 feet deep to ensure foundation stability that could withstand massive impacts. Team 2 mixed concrete with rebar reinforcement that would anchor our defensive structure to bedrock. Team 3 cut and prepared railroad rails according to Frank's exact specifications. Team 4 welded mounting frames at precisely calculated angles. Team 5 installed springs and dampening systems that would absorb and redirect kinetic energy. I served as Frank's assistant, learning real-time engineering while helping coordinate the most complex construction project our community had ever undertaken. Measuring angles with laser levels taught me why precision mattered in physics applications. Calculating force vectors showed me how mathematics translated into real-world solutions. Understanding why every detail mattered gave me appreciation for the expertise Frank had developed over 35 years of professional engineering. Why 15 degrees instead of 20, Grandpa? 15 degrees provides optimal return force without causing excessive damage. We want to educate, not kill. Progress moved at an astonishing pace when experienced professionals worked together toward a common goal. Everyone approached their tasks with pride that came from finally taking action instead of living in fear. Elderly neighbors helped by organizing tools and supplies. Children learned engineering principles by watching experts solve complex problems. Conversations flowed between people who'd been strangers before Karen's terrorism forced them together. Surveillance drones appeared overhead every hour, Karen's method of monitoring our defensive preparations. Her social media posts grew increasingly frantic as she watched our community unite against her criminal enterprise. "Illegal fortification being constructed," she wrote in all capitals that screamed desperation. "I will bring federal enforcement." The next post promised, "Those rebels will regret their defiance." A third threatened, "You will face enhanced enforcement." But intelligence flowed both ways in our digital age. Someone with access to Karen's inner circle sent Frank an anonymous text message. "She's hiring heavy muscle, 10 new drivers, promising $1,000 each for successful ramming. Planning maximum impact demonstration. Be careful." Bill studied the warning with growing concern. 10 vehicles? That's not harassment anymore. That's an assault. Frank remained calm with the confidence of someone who understood exactly what we were building. "Let them come with 10 cars or 20. Physics operates the same regardless of numbers. And look around us." He gestured toward the construction site that had become something more than fence building. Community pride was being rebuilt along with our property defenses. Elderly residents were contributing skills they'd forgotten they possessed. Children were learning that standing together could overcome individual helplessness. Neighbors were talking to each other for the first time in years. "This isn't just about stopping vehicles, Bill. This is about standing up, together." Security measures were installed discreetly but comprehensively. 8 cameras with night vision capability covered every approach angle. Motion sensors triggered floodlights that would illuminate any nighttime approach. Warning signs were positioned every 10 feet along our perimeter. "Warning, reinforced steel barrier. Do not ram. Severe damage will occur. You are being recorded. Trespassers will be prosecuted. After Helen's review, our paperwork was airtight. Anyone who rammed it would be committing felonies on camera. Sunset on the fourth day of construction revealed 200 feet of railroad steel gleaming like armor in the fading light. The fence looked imposing but remained completely defensive in design and purpose. No offensive weapons, no illegal modifications, just physics waiting to demonstrate Newton's third law to anyone foolish enough to test its principles. Karen's final social media post of the evening carried the ominous tone of someone preparing for war. Tomorrow, the rebels learn about true power. I captured a screenshot for our evidence file. Duke growled at the computer screen as if he could sense the malevolence behind those words. The storm was finally coming, and we were ready. Day 5 arrived with the urgency of a deadline that everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. 6 a.m. found the entire community working with desperate efficiency to complete our defensive project before Karen's promised retaliation arrived. The final railroad rails were welded into position under Frank's careful supervision, his wheelchair positioned for optimal oversight despite the pain radiating from his injured shoulder. The build exceeded expectations. 200 feet of continuous rail at a 15-degree lean, 52 sections locked tight and signed so no one could claim ignorance. A volunteer brought his old pickup for a controlled run. At about 20 miles an hour, the rails absorbed, then shoved the truck straight back, crumpling the bumper while the fence stayed unmarked, unbent, unmoved. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across our property like celebration of a military victory. Physics worked exactly as Frank had calculated, promising consequences for anyone foolish enough to test its principles with serious violence. We mounted high-visibility warning signs reviewed by Helen's team, impossible to miss and impossible to misunderstand. Frank operated from his wheelchair with the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a complex engineering problem while injured and under extreme pressure. It's not a fence anymore, kiddo. It's a physics classroom. Helen Wilson arrived with a convoy that transformed our property into the headquarters of an official investigation. District Attorney Rebecca Clark brought prosecutorial authority that elevated our situation from local harassment to federal crime. Detective James Smith carried case files that revealed the true scope of Karen's criminal enterprise. Frank, we've been digging deeper into Karen Hayes' operation. What we discovered goes far beyond local extortion. The files spread across our Kit Clark table painted a picture of organized crime that spanned 3 states. Karen had never filed any expansion paperwork with any government agency. Her fake HOA fees totaled $487,000 from documented victims. 326 confirmed victims had been systematically terrorized over 3 years. 19 properties were sold under duress at below-market prices. Money trails led to offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for harboring criminal proceeds. RICO predicates were clearly established. This was organized crime using HOA authority as cover. But there's more, Detective Smith continued, connecting his phone to our TV screen. We have an undercover officer embedded in her newest crew. The recording that played chilled my blood with its casual discussion of violence against our family. Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience from subordinates who feared her more than legal consequences. I want complete destruction. 10 vehicles isn't enough? Hire 15. This is war. Those peasants think they can challenge me? Her voice escalated with each word, revealing the madness that had always lurked beneath her corporate facade. $1,000 for each driver if ramming succeeds. $2,000 if the fence actually falls. $5,000 bonus for whoever collapses the section near the house. An uncertain voice responded from someone clearly uncomfortable with the escalating violence. But ma'am, those are railroad tracks. I don't care. If necessary, we'll ram 100 times. My authority must be respected. District Attorney Clark looked at Frank with the grim satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd just heard a confession. That's conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly weapon. Multiple counts. She's building her own legal grave. Frank processed the intelligence with his engineer's mind for calculating risk factors. How many vehicles does she actually have access to? Our officer reports 3 SUVs confirmed, possibly more. She's becoming increasingly desperate as community resistance grows. I couldn't hide my fear any longer. What if someone gets really hurt when they hit the fence? Helen assured me with the confidence of someone who'd spent years managing crisis situations. That's why we're here. Sheriff units ready for immediate response. Ambulance on standby. Judge signed arrest warrants. The moment they ram, they'll be taken into custody. Evening brought a community barbecue that felt like both celebration and wake. We were celebrating the completion of our defensive project while acknowledging that tomorrow would bring consequences none of us could completely predict. Frank addressed the assembled crowd with words that carried the weight of someone preparing for battle. I want to thank everyone. You didn't just build a fence, you built hope. You showed that bullies don't always win when communities stand together. Tomorrow, Karen Hayes and her crew will come. They'll ram this fence with everything they have. Physics will respond exactly as designed. But remember, this isn't about revenge. This is about protection, about education, about showing that actions have consequences. Sheriff Tom Williams, Bill's cousin, confirmed operational plans that would ensure everything remained legal and documented. Units would be positioned nearby, but remain invisible until after the ramming occurred. No intervention would happen before Karen committed her crimes. Arrest teams were ready for immediate deployment. Medical personnel would respond within minutes. News media had been accidentally informed about interesting developments at our location. Camera systems received final testing to ensure complete documentation of whatever happened. Angles were perfect. Live stream capability was established with backup systems. Tomorrow's events would be recorded from every possible perspective for legal proceedings and public education. 10 p.m. found most volunteers returning home, leaving a core team to monitor our defensive preparations. The fence stood silent under moonlight that made the railroad steel gleam like armor waiting for battle. Frank's engineering had created something that looked almost artistic in its precision and purpose. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with anticipation and fear. "Grandpa, what if the fence doesn't work like you calculated?" Frank smiled with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades designing barriers for military installations and government buildings. "Emma, sweetheart, I've designed protective structures that guard against terrorist attacks. This fence will work. The only question is how spectacular the physics lesson will be." Duke suddenly perked up, his attention focused on distant sounds that only his canine hearing could detect. Engine noise approached and faded. Reconnaissance mission completed. "Scouts," Bill observed, checking his phone for messages from other community members. "Checking our defenses." Frank nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Let them see. Let them report back to Karen. Tomorrow, Newton's third law gets demonstrated publicly." I cuddled Duke while trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Will Mrs. Hayes finally learn not to bully people? "One way or another," Frank said gently, his voice carrying both love and determination. "Tomorrow she learns that some lessons can only be taught by physics." The question that kept me awake was whether Karen would actually participate in the ramming herself, or if she'd send others to face consequences she was too cowardly to risk personally. 10 a.m. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity that made every detail sharp and immediate. Half our neighborhood had gathered to witness what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. News vans parked at strategic distances, their crews claiming routine coverage while positioning cameras for optimal angles. Sheriff units maintained routine patrol patterns that would bring them within response range at critical moments. Frank and I sat on our front porch, his arm still secured in the hospital sling while my live stream equipment prepared to document whatever was about to unfold. Duke lay beside us with the tension of an animal sensing approaching storm. 200 feet of railroad steel fence stood magnificent in the morning sunlight, warning signs impossibly bright and clear. I started broadcasting preemptively to our victim support group, which had grown to over 300 members. "Hi everyone. Today might be the day Newton's law gets proven in the most spectacular way possible." Then Duke's low growl announced what our human senses hadn't yet detected. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger with mechanical purpose. Here they came. 3 black SUVs approached in tight formation, their speed and precision indicating serious intent rather than harassment theater. Fresh HOA enforcement decals appeared larger and more official-looking than previous versions. 6 fake cops sat inside the vehicles, their navy uniforms crisp and badges gleaming with Amazon polish. The middle vehicle carried Karen Hayes in the passenger seat, and her appearance exceeded even my wildest expectations of ridiculous power projection. She showed up in full power cosplay, pink suit with 80s shoulders, a rhinestone tiara, an HOA president sash, and a golden clipboard like a scepter. The 3 vehicles stopped 100 feet from our fence, allowing dust to settle while silence stretched like a held breath. Karen emerged from her vehicle with a megaphone, designer heels clicking against asphalt with the authority of someone who believed the entire world existed for her entertainment. "Reynolds, "This is your final warning," she called through the megaphone. "Remove the illegal fortification now." Her voice trembled on the last line, the performance fraying at the edges. The crowd responded with boos and laughter that carried across our property like community rejection of everything Karen represented. Someone shouted, "You're a criminal!" Others joined with similar accusations that stripped away any pretense of legitimacy. Karen's face flushed red with rage that transformed her makeup into a grotesque mask. She spun toward her fake enforcement team with commands that brooked no discussion. "Positions! Prepare to ram!" The drivers looked at our fence, then at each other, their expressions revealing the first cracks in their commitment to Karen's cause. Railroad steel gleamed with menacing promise of consequences that even hired muscle could recognize. "Ma'am, those are actual railroad tracks. The money I'm paying, you obey, $1,000 each." "Lady, $1,000 isn't worth dying for." "Cowards! Weaklings! Watch me show you how it's done." Karen stormed back to the middle vehicle, her authority crumbling as subordinates questioned orders that seemed increasingly suicidal. "Driver, maximum speed. Show them my power." The driver hesitated, clearly recognizing the difference between property damage and potential vehicular suicide. But Karen's screaming, combined with peer pressure from other fake cops and greed overcoming common sense, finally convinced him to follow orders. "All right, let's do this. For the HOA." 3 vehicles revved engines that announced their commitment to testing physics against fake authority. They spread out to target 3 different fence sections. Karen's vehicle aimed at the strongest central position where Frank had concentrated his most sophisticated engineering. Karen continued screaming through her megaphone even while strapped into the passenger seat of a vehicle preparing to ram industrial-grade steel. "On my count, show them HOA power," engines roared. Wheels spun against asphalt. Dust clouds rose like smoke from battlefield preparation. 3. I zoomed my camera while maintaining live stream narration. "Physics incoming, folks." 2. Tires screeched against pavement as 3 vehicles prepared for synchronized assault. 1. 3 SUVs accelerated simultaneously. 20 miles per hour. 35 miles per hour of mass and velocity aimed at teaching Newton's third law to students who'd never bothered learning science. Vehicle 1. North corner. Mike, a recent Craigslist hire who'd thought this was easy money, aimed for the corner post under the mistaken assumption that corners represented structural weakness. His 35-mile-per-hour impact met double-reinforced steel anchored 6 feet into concrete bedrock. The railroad steel didn't even vibrate. Mike's SUV front end crumpled instantly like an aluminum can crushed by industrial machinery. The hood buckled upward, completely blocking the windshield. Airbags exploded with gunshot reports. Mike's fake badge flew off his chest and landed 20 feet away in our flower beds. The vehicle bounced backward 10 feet, steam hissing from a destroyed radiator. Mike stumbled out with blood running from his nose, his fake uniform jacket torn and dirty. "She said it was wood. Normal wooden fence, not this." He threw his fake badge at Karen's vehicle. "I quit. This is insane." Vehicle 2, center section, Karen's ride. Karen screamed encouragement right up until impact. "Faster, more speed, destroy it." Her driver floored the accelerator, achieving 40 miles per hour before striking the strongest section of Frank's defensive masterpiece. Triple rails reinforced with industrial springs absorbed initial contact before physics took control of the situation. The impact compressed springs momentarily before Frank's 15-degree angle redirected force exactly as calculated. Energy that had approached at 40 miles per hour returned at identical velocity but opposite direction. Boom! The entire SUV launched backward not through flight, but through violent reverse thrust that defied everything Karen understood about authority and power. 30 feet in 2 seconds. The vehicle spun twice before stopping facing the wrong direction, its occupants thoroughly educated about the relationship between action and reaction. Karen's tiara flew out the passenger window, spinning like helicopter blades before landing in our vegetable garden. Her wig went in the opposite direction, caught by wind currents created by the vehicle's sudden reversal. The presidential sash tangled in her seatbelt, now reading "Ho preside," after most of it tore away during impact. "No, this can't be happening," she whispered, voice thin, eyes glassy with shock, trying to make sense of steel that would not yield. The driver and fake cop companion crawled out through windows rather than risk opening doors that might not function after their physics lesson. "Crazy woman! She never mentioned railroad steel." We could have died. Vehicle 3, South Section. Tony had witnessed both previous vehicles receive spectacular physics education. Survival instinct triggered emergency braking, but Karen's radio commands left no room for self-preservation. "Ram it or I'll sue you for breach of contract." His 25-mile-per-hour impact still destroyed his vehicle's front end completely. Bumper detached and skittered across asphalt. Hood crimped like accordion metal. Radiator exploded in steam clouds that obscured vision. The reduced speed meant less dramatic pushback, only 8 feet of reverse travel, but the vehicle was equally disabled. Tony and his partner exited immediately, their fake uniforms abandoned like evidence of crimes they no longer wanted to commit. "We're done. This is fraud. We'll testify against her. She lied about everything." Fake badges flew through the air like frisbees as 6 former employees abandoned Karen's sinking criminal enterprise. The fence stood completely undamaged. Not a scratch, not a dent, not even a paint mark. Railroad steel remained unmoved while 3 destroyed SUVs scattered around our property like discarded toys. Karen crawled from the wreckage of her vehicle and her criminal empire, makeup smeared by airbag powder, tiara missing, wig gone, presidential sash reduced to tatters. "You're all fired, traitors, cowards. I'll get real enforcement. Federal marshals, the National Guard. The president will hear about this." Then sirens. Real ones. Sheriff vehicles surrounded the destruction scene while officers approached with handcuffs and Miranda rights. "Karen Hayes, you're under arrest." "For what? I'm the HOA president." Assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, fraud, extortion, racketeering. Should I continue reading charges? But, my authority. The handcuffs clicked with finality that ended 3 years of organized terrorism. 6 former fake cops lined up to cooperate with authorities, their testimonies competing for who could provide the most damaging evidence against their former employer. My live stream had captured everything in high definition for 300,000 viewers and climbing. Comments exploded with celebration, physics jokes, and demands for justice that would echo across social media for months. And that, internet, is how Newton's third law works, equal and opposite reaction. Frank smiled quietly from his wheelchair. 35 years of engineering expertise finally applied to the most important project of his career. Class dismissed. The video exploded across the internet with the viral velocity that only perfect justice can achieve. 5 million views within 24 hours. News networks picked up our story faster than Karen's fake authority had crumbled against railroad steel. Headlines framed it as physics meeting justice, my favorite read, Newton's Law, Karen Zero. The investigation that followed moved with the efficiency of a federal task force that had finally found their smoking gun. 326 victims stepped forward with testimonies that painted a picture of systematic terrorism spanning multiple states. Documented theft totaled $487,000 in fraudulent fees alone. 19 forced property sales added another $1 million in damages. Interstate wire fraud triggered federal jurisdiction. RICO charges transformed Karen from a local scammer to an organized crime defendant. All 6 former fake cops cooperated completely, providing text messages, email records, payment documentation, and recorded conversations that revealed the full scope of Karen's criminal enterprise. Their testimonies detailed recruitment methods, operational procedures, and Karen's expansion plans that would have eventually terrorized thousands more elderly victims. Karen's empire disintegrated within hours of her arrest. The real Meadowbrook HOA called emergency meetings to distance itself from her unauthorized activities. Karen Hayes never had board approval for any expansion. We're shocked by these revelations. Sincere apologies to all affected families. New board elections will be held immediately. 3 months later, federal courthouse proceedings provided the final chapter of Karen's criminal career. She insisted on representing herself, despite her attorney's desperate attempts to negotiate plea agreements that might have reduced her sentence to single digits. "I am the rightful president," Karen screamed at the judge during opening statements. "Expansion was necessary for property values. Those fees were legal assessments. Enforcement is my constitutional right." Federal prosecutor Maria Santos methodically destroyed every aspect of Karen's defense with evidence that could have convicted her 3 times over. Real HOA boundaries proved expansion claims were fabricated. Missing paperwork demonstrated conspiracy to commit fraud. 326 victim testimonies established pattern and scope. Financial records traced money to offshore accounts. The ramming videos played in slow motion showed attempted vehicular assault. Karen interrupted constantly with objections that revealed her complete disconnection from reality. Fake news! Deep state conspiracy! I have presidential authority. Judge Janet Morrison finally added contempt charges when Karen screamed, "You can't hold a president in contempt." The verdict surprised no one who'd followed the evidence. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud carried 5 years. Extortion added 4 more. Assault conspiracy contributed 3 additional years. RICO enhancements pushed the total to 12 years in federal prison. Restitution of $1.2 million would compensate victims for financial and emotional damages. Lifetime ban from any HOA or neighborhood organization would protect future communities from her predatory instincts. Karen's reaction provided final evidence of her mental state. Appeal! Supreme Court, United Nations! She was escorted from the courtroom still wearing the torn remnants of her presidential sash, screaming about authority that had never existed anywhere except in her delusional imagination. Frank used his portion of the settlement money to establish programs that would protect other seniors from similar scams. A free legal clinic provided elderly residents with resources to fight fraudulent schemes. Annual engineering scholarships encouraged young people to study practical applications of physics. Monthly Know Your Rights workshops educated communities about real versus fake authority. A fence maintenance fund ensured our defensive structure would stand as a permanent reminder that bullies eventually encounter immovable objects. The fence even drew visitors, teachers, trainees, and engineering classes studying real-world physics, tens of thousands in the first year. Helen won re-election in a landslide, and the county passed the Karen Hayes Act, strict rules on claimed HOA authority, felony penalties for physical enforcement, triple damages for fraud, and funded legal help for victims. 5 years later, I stood before judges at the Intel Science Fair, my project titled Defensive Physics Applications in Community Protection, earning recognition that would fund my college education. I closed with what Grandpa taught me. When human law falters, physical law holds. Frank, now 77 but still sharp as the railroad steel he'd wielded against organized crime, teaches part-time engineering courses at our community college. He starts every semester by playing our viral video, using it to demonstrate how theoretical knowledge becomes practical protection when applied with precision and courage. The fence still stands strong, painted bright blue with an American flag mural that makes it visible from miles away. A historical marker installed by the county reads, Reynolds Fence, 2024, where community defeated fraud through unity and science. Physics doesn't lie, Frank Reynolds. Karen Hayes remains in federal prison, where newsletters report she teaches business ethics classes to fellow inmates while still signing her correspondence, President Hayes. Parole has been denied twice due to lack of remorse and continued delusions of authority. The ripple effects of our viral video led to investigations that shut down similar fake HOA operations across 12 states, protecting thousands of potential victims from Karen's network of criminal associates. Standing beside our fence at sunset, watching railroad steel gleam like armor in the fading light, I asked Frank the question that had bothered me for years. Grandpa, do you think she ever really learned her lesson? Frank chuckled with the satisfaction of someone who'd applied 35 years of engineering expertise to the most important problem of his career. Physics taught its lesson perfectly, kiddo. Whether she learned it, that's entirely up to her. Duke, now showing gray around his golden muzzle, barked agreement with the wisdom that only dogs and engineers seem to possess. But you learned, Emma, and that's what matters most. Equal and opposite reaction, Grandpa. Always. Always.